Welcome to another episode of Battleground Chats, where I talk to interesting people from the risk and resilience world. And today I'm thrilled to have Paul Minter with us. Thank you for joining us, Paul.
Morning, Craig. Thank you.
So Paul joined Battleground a couple of months ago from, I'll let him tell you where from, but let's go back first to your background in the UK. Paul, take us on the journey, the Paul Minter risk journey.
Thanks, Craig. Wonderful chance to talk about myself. So it all started when I finished university. I handed in my dissertation on the Friday, and then on the Monday, I had a job at the UK regulator in the economics team.
What did you study? So you've given your dissertation on what?
Economics.
Okay, so it comes from an economics background.
That's right. So it was a master's in economics. Dissertation went in on Friday. I was sure to print it in colour, because back then you probably got a couple of extra points for having colourful charts and things. And then, I had a job as an economist at what used to be the Financial Services Authority, so the English regulator there, before they split in two. So we copied the Australian Twin Peak method, and I was there to ride out the split.
Okay, interesting. So what was your first role?
Economist, which was really, really a direct line of sight from what I'd been studying. So in my university course, we'd done some hands-on practical econometrics, and I essentially got to do that for a job, which is ace.
Right.
And probably the kind of the most tangible example was it was estimating the response of banks to the new Basel III regulations coming through.
Back to Basel. Yep.
Yes. So Basel III comes, asks everyone to hold more capital. What will banks do? Roughly lend a bit less. But we modelled that with a bit more precision.
Okay. Great. So how long were you there for?
Oh, way too long, actually. I was on the grad program, 7 years in total. And that set me up well. I left there to go to a consultancy, one of the big ones.
Yep. Same thing in economics?
No. So they picked up on the fact that I was been at the regulator and had me in the regulation assurance team.
Okay.
I ended up doing a ton of audits because they were a bit shy of auditors, which was quite scary, given I had no audit training. I had no audit training, and I was out there on my own in the field doing audits of ICAPs. So
I must say, I had the same experience. When I joined KPMG, they just split into Bearing Point and KPMG here in Australia. And when I did vacation work, they were one company. When I joined as a grad a year after, they were two. And the work I thought I was going to be doing didn't exist. So they also put me in audit, and I'd never done audit before. So exactly the same.
Isn't it ridiculous?
The same.
So now it gives you a healthy pinch of salt for when a report comes through from one of the big four. You say, well, I know the 21-year-olds who are behind that.
Exactly.
Yes. And as I go, by the way, I'm going to describe essentially a life that goes through the various lines of defence. So think about it. I started in the economics function of a regulator. That couldn't be more ivory tower chin stroking. Then external audit, so line 3. I then left there to go to a op risk consultancy in the UK. It's called ORX. So their base business is swapping operational risk loss data.
Yes.
Anonymizing it and helping people build capital models with anonymous data from everybody else. But then they had a very captive audience that did a fair bit of consulting on the side. So that got me into the world of frameworks and RCSAs and the kind of the bread and butter of op risk management.
Yes. Okay.
So we're kind of going down the lines of defence. You can see in consulting.
So you're now in what, second?
Ish, kind of helping second, so 2.5. Okay. Then I went into line 2 proper at Macquarie, and they were the ones who were kind
here in the UK. Are you still in the UK?
The UK with ORX, and then Macquarie were kind enough to buy me a plane ticket and a visa to come to Australia.
Why the move to Australia?
My South African wife was fed up of English winters that went for 9 or so months.
Yeah. I hear that.
Well, you
So
experience it in Melbourne.
you moved for your wife.
Yes, essentially. Wife and
Excellent.
sunshine.
Wife and
Happy
sunshine.
wife,
I don't blame
happy
you.
life.
Absolutely. Okay. So Macquarie Bank, and you know, you're not the first person we've had on our podcast that has had a company, a lady friend and moved, or male friend and moved countries. So welcome to the club. So okay, you moved to Australia, Macquarie Bank.
Yes, so Macquarie, line 2 in the op-risk capital world, and spent a bit of time there. And then line 1 within Macquarie.
Yep.
Interestingly, line 1 for the risk function. So I was line 1 for line 2, which was...
Explain what that means to people out there who don't quite understand that.
So the risk function at the time in Macquarie had about, 500 odd staff. They would have had, 30 something systems and 1 million processes. So the risk function themselves had people, system, process. Therefore had to abide by the rules of Macquarie Group. It just so happened that they were also the authors of the rules of Macquarie Group. So it was very much turning a mirror on the risk staff
on
and saying,
themselves.
Exactly right, which is great in terms of psychology.
Yeah. Okay. So practically, how does that play out? What does that actually mean from a day job? What did you do day to day?
Some very boring run-of-the-mill things. So user access reviews was pretty typical. A lot of reconciling whether data input matched data output and whether you could trace through the manipulation. I think one of my first tasks
for the risk function.
Correct.
Which is really fascinating because we often hear of that risk function doing it outwardly to other parts of the business, but to hear it being done to itself is a fascinating concept.
Yes. So a lot of it was the question, how do you know?
Right.
How do you know you've got a complete list of obligations that you're asking line 1 to do properly? How do you know you've got a model that does what it's meant to do, even though it's 5 years old? How do you know? How do you know? That was my go-to question.
Right. And that question is a really interesting one. How do you know? Do you feel that question can be used across the board or was unique to the role you played?
I think it's a universal question. I think it's such a powerful one to get into beyond feelings and vibe and trust in. Jim always does a good job. It's, well, where do you document that? Where's the evidence? How do you really know? How do you convince somebody that's 3 steps removed from Jim? Very universal.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think there's a lot of people that do trust the vibe and the gut, which there's definitely a part of that, right? But asking the question, how do you know, getting the tangible evidence is really interesting. I know we face that when we do business impact assessments and you ask, well, how time critical are you? And they say, we're very important. Okay, but how do you know? What's the proof? Where on the risk consequence table do you fit? Give us evidence for that. So that's really interesting that you applied that to yourself, to your own lens. It's great.
Yeah, it was fascinating and like I said, a real insight into human behaviour and almost an affront to ask a risk manager how she manages risk. It's kind of a moment of ooh, how dare you?
Yeah. A risk manager asking themselves how they manage risk. It's a fascinating concept.
It was great. And then kind of hearing the reasons why it doesn't apply. I was like, whoa, that doesn't stack up.
Yeah. Do you do to yourself what you do to others?
100%. I call it the dentist with bad teeth.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. Okay, that's a really interesting insight. What do you think is the biggest thing you learnt from that role?
Well, the psychology and the role of EQ. So in risk management, I found a lot of people have got a sense of, the buzzwords, so assurance and risk and reporting and so on, but that doesn't make for a good risk manager. That's the nuts and bolts. It's the EQ on top of that. It's the ability to filter out what is and isn't relevant. It's the ability to prioritize. It's the ability to be a sympathetic human when you're interacting with other humans. The nuts and bolts is very much the kind of the ticket to play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting because I think emotional intelligence is becoming a much more of a hot topic, and you see the people in the risk world that have it achieve a lot more, in my view, and get deeper, and get the value out of the work a lot more than those that just do a tick and flick or box ticking exercise.
100%. Yeah, fully agree. And the other thing is simplicity. So during that Macquarie time, I was very involved in the GRC that they were using. And it was only towards the end, actually, I was speaking to one of our system managers, that the simplicity of how the whole thing should hang together, both the system and then by extrapolation, the risk framework, there's only 4 or 5 boxes that need to be completed and all the rest falls into that. And that simplicity can strike through any conversation and really give a vision of what should and shouldn't be done and what is and isn't important. And honestly, I've been building a career on that since.
Okay, so where does that lead you? How have you done that? What's the key takeaway from that?
Well, my immediate takeaway from that was I left Macquarie and went to APRA and introduced into APRA the almost operating effectiveness test of GRC data as part of supervision. So supervision had been in that kind of vibe space, particularly for non-financial risk, because there just isn't that much data. So it was a lot of report reading and reading wonderfully PDF'd and shiny policy documents, but without any meat behind it. So I introduced a GRC export analysis to the supervision approach, which was you give me a full, complete, raw, unfiltered extract from your GRC.
Yes.
And then we as a regulator will assess it against that kind of simple 1, 2, 3 ABC I mentioned. And you can ask some very easy black or white questions. So it was never, I see you have 400 risks. I believe you should have 300. That would be impossible for the regulator.
Because that's a vibe thing. That's a vibe.
100%. And it's impossible for the regulators to know anything like the knowledge that a company insider has. But you can ask very dumb, easy questions, such as, well, this risk has no controls attached. How is the residual lower than its inherent?
Yeah.
Or these risks are all flashing red in your GRC, but it hasn't made any of the risk reports up to your executive committee.
Yep.
And those kind of very easy pub questions bring some very good answers.
And is that because companies don't see that? They don't get into that level of understanding, or because they're in the weeds all the time, they miss things like that, or something else? Why do you think companies don't see it themselves?
Great question. I think probably a mixture of both. So I have found over time at the regulator, a lot of people use the GRC essentially as an incident record, like just a system of incident record. Everyone's on-ramp to GRC's incidents. Yeah. And it kind of just about stops there. It takes a pretty experienced and wise line to force people to make connections within the various modules and then use them sensibly. And I think that all hangs from the fact that they don't have that very simple flow of logic through their frameworks and therefore through their systems. Yeah.
That's fascinating insight. And I think for our listeners to hear that sometimes you need to take a step back and look at what you have. Look how it hangs together. Look what can you glean and garner from your own system to help you, right? So put that, coming back full circle, put the mirror on yourselves, and your own company could be really interesting.
Exactly right. I often ask the question, when I was part of the regulator here, I asked the question, well, why do you bother recording incidents? And there'd be a long answer about, well, we must, and it's legislated, and we need to make sure we do our remediation and so on. Which I then followed with, well, wouldn't you do that anyway? So absent a GRC, wouldn't you remediate the customers anyway? Run it off a spreadsheet. What's the difference? And then kind of some umming and ahhing and maybe another half-baked answer. What I was fishing for there is, well, what you want is your incidents to demonstrate to you where your controls are or aren't working.
Yes.
And you can aggregate up using connections. So you've got a kind of a node which is the control, and then a bunch of incidents. And simply for me, if you've got a ton of incidents all coming up against the same control, it's probably not working. You need to have a look at it again.
Yeah. And what was your learning around how many companies you looked at could make those connections versus didn't even have the insight to make the connections?
It was about 1 in 10. So I saw at the regulator, I saw about 100 GRC exports, I'd say.
Yep.
And it was about 1 in 10 that would pass that connection logic type test. Everyone else would stumble and fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once you've stumbled and fallen, that how do you know question becomes really spicy. How do you know that risk is well managed if there are no controls attached, or if the controls have no incident records attached? So the connections seem very techy and very kind of in the weeds, but it quickly can escalate to, well, how do you know things are going how you think they are?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And I know, talking to you, Paul, one of the things that you're going to do at Battleground, because we are out of time, so just to kind of summarize what I've heard, and it all kind of makes sense now to me, because one of the things we've spoken about since we met over a year ago and we started talking and Joe introduced us was your passion around that data connection and around that keeping it simple. And what insights can you really gain? So, when we spoke about you joining Battleground, you said that. You said, I want to take what I've learned from the Macquarie time, from the OX time, from the APRA time, and help clients to see the connections and to use their data for more insight, especially with their control. So that kind of makes sense. You want to take all that, help clients to overcome these issues. Because if it's only 1 in 10, there's a lot of opportunity for people to use the data they have for better insights. So that's 100%. Fascinating.
Yeah, and just to make their job easier. So personally, I feel everybody's kind of got about 75% of the work done, and they haven't quite got the final bit of work done to create the value that makes their job, particularly in line 2, so much easier. And it just takes a tiny few tweaks, and then suddenly a lot of things will come a lot more easily. And if I'm honest, a lot of the kind of bad vibes around line 2 and risk managers will start to melt away.
Yep. Interesting. Paul, thank you so much for being on Battleground Chats. Welcome to the Battleground family, and we will chat again soon.
Lovely stuff. Thank you, Craig.